Even if he is aiming for a limited war, the scenarios of it getting totally out of hand are quite high. That there's going to be a lot of destruction elsewhere in the region, including attacks on Israel.
My concern is that in case the Iranian regime right now is toppled, somebody more younger, more radical is going to come into power, and they will ensure that Iran gets the nuclear bomb.
Not only is Israel far more powerful than Iran, but the military budgets of Saudi Arabia, even of UAE, are substantially higher than Iran.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Stephen Zunes. He's a professor of politics. He's also a program director of the Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. And today we will talk about the rising tensions in the Middle East. Mr. Zunes, thank you for speaking to Fair Observer once again.
Good to be with you again.
Okay, I want to talk about US President Donald Trump. He has said that the United States is open to carrying out limited strikes on Iran. One, what does that mean? And number two, can there be limited war with Iran?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it would be a clear violation of the United Nations Charter and arguably the U.S. Constitution as well, because he has not gone to Congress to get the okay to launch a war, as is clear in American constitutional law. And yeah, I'm glad that you're starting off with this very point, because even if he is aiming for a limited war, the scenarios of it getting totally out of hand are quite high. I mean, Iran would not stay idly while they're being attacked. I mean, obviously, the United States could inflict far more damage, but at the same time, U.S. bases could be attacked throughout the region, and not just by Iranian missiles, but by allied militia groups, such as in Iraq. They could attack not just the U.S. Navy in the Gulf and Arabian Sea and elsewhere, but they could disrupt other traffic, effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, where at least 20% of the world's oil sails through, and of course, the global economic implications of that sort of disruption are quite high. And, we've seen many wars in the past that started out as limited, but ended up escalating and going on for a much longer time than originally anticipated.
Right. And that's something that I'm really worried about, because if you look at the military buildup, we've got almost 600 US fighter jets in the region. We've got 2 Korea strike groups in the region. We've got almost 50 warships all around Iran. And experts are saying that this is the largest US military buildup since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. What do you think is Washington's game plan?
Well, what's disturbing, of course, is that there's never been this kind of buildup where there has not been a war. And so it does indicate that the Trump administration is at least seriously considering this as a military option. And perhaps they're thinking that the show of force would lead the Iranians to compromise. But the problem, basically, is that the administration has made clear that even if they did give in to all their demands regarding the nuclear program, which go well beyond the original nuclear agreement that Trump broke off, that right. Unlike that original agreement, sanctions would not be lifted. So there's no incentive. And, anybody who deals with international negotiations and diplomacy and that kind of thing is that if you're going to, that you need to lift the pain, you need to offer something in return. Because right. Without that, Iranian leaders will figure, well, if we give in on this, Trump's going to demand we give up our missiles, we stop supporting our allies in the region, that we essentially step down and no longer rule. I mean, that there is little indication that this would be the last demand that the Trump administration puts out to them. And so, when you can see how there's really a little incentive under these circumstances for the Iranian regime to try to make a deal on Trump's terms.
Right. I mean, on one hand, you've got Trump saying that he wants another deal, but it's ironic that he was the first one. I mean, he was the one who exited the deal in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. So if the nuclear program was really the issue, he wouldn't have pulled out of that agreement.
Right.
And if democracy and human rights were the issue, he wouldn't be supporting these autocratic Arab governments. I mean, the real problem he has with Iran is that it is the one remaining country in the region that rejects U.S. hegemony. And this goes back to the Bush administration, the idea of full spectrum dominance. The idea, that in the post Cold War era, we should not only challenge any potential superpower rival like China, but any regional, rival as well. And yes, the Iranian regime is brutally repressive, reactionary. It practices its own form of imperialism in the region. So certainly not making excuses for them.
Right.
But that is the real issue again for the United States, is that they refuse to play along, and they are unwilling to acquiesce to America's vision of hegemony.
Yeah, but do you think Iran will buckle? Because given the amount of military buildup, I mean, the Trump administration is hoping that somehow this arm twists Iran into coming to the negotiating table. But do you think Tehran is going to do that?
Well, they've offered to return to the negotiating table, but it's true negotiations. Trump is basically making a bunch of unilateral demands and saying, take it or leave it. And again, that's not how you do international diplomacy. And we've seen this. I mean, he's a real estate guy. He's bullied his way to a power, by all sorts of demands and bribery and extortion and that kind of thing. And that may have made him a wealthy businessman, but is not really how you deal with international diplomacy. I mean, Iran has been, formerly known as Persia, has been a major regional power for over 2,500 years. And it's a large country, close to 100 million people. It is not one that it's not some banana republic. It's not like some tiny Central American or Caribbean country where the CIA or the Marines can come in and change the government. It's a much more complex situation, and even though the regime is decidedly unpopular among its own people, there is a strong sense of nationalism. That goes back to this incredible heritage that they have, that incredible history and pride. And I've been to Iran, and I've talked to many Iranians, the vast majority of whom oppose the regime, but they're also very much opposed to this kind of bullying and disrespect from the United States. So this kind of leads to the issue that this is not going to lead to regime change. It can lead to just the opposite, that people tend to rally around the flag if they're being attacked. I mean, I knew the Serbs, young Serbs in Otpor, who've been struggling for years against the Milosevic regime, and they very much opposed the U.S. bombing of their country because it set back their struggle. The people who were protesting Milosevic one week, the following week, were out there protesting NATO and the bombing. They did eventually win, fortunately, but it definitely set back of their struggle. So if the goal is to support these courageous people in the streets who face down the tanks and the guns despite horrific massacres, this is not the way to go about it.
Right. So, Mr. Zunes, you say two very interesting things. One, that Iran is not Venezuela, and second, the people of Iran. Yes, I've also interacted with a lot of Iranians, and they're proud people. They're really proud of their culture. They're proud of their country, and they have their differences with the regime, but that doesn't mean they don't see themselves as Iranians first. And military action could definitely unite them. But that's what I want to ask you. What if there is military action? What options does Iran have then?
Oh, yes. Briefly, let me just add one little piece to that. Is that the big mistake the United States made in Vietnam was that we saw this as an expansion of a totalitarian ideology, comparable to Nazism. And so basically we said, how do you deal with that kind of the expansionist totalitarian thing? You need to fight it with military force. And in doing so, we ignored the fact that even though the National Liberation Front, what we call the Viet Cong, was indeed communist-led, it was first and foremost a nationalist movement. So we didn't understand why the more troops we sent, the more we bombed, the stronger the opposition became. And similarly in Iran, we see the Islamist aspect, and they're trying to spread their reactionary version of Shia Islam in the region, but we ignore that strong nationalist sentiment. In terms of what's going to happen as a result of this, it's not going to lead to regime change. It's not going to set back their nuclear program, very far, as we saw when they were supposedly totally obliterated back last summer with the U.S. bombing. And they may actually be able to target a few leaders. But the interesting thing about Iran is that, unlike a lot of autocratic systems that are centered on one leader, it's a fairly complex interaction of various factions. Obviously, you have the Ayatollahs, particularly Khamenei. You have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but you also have an elected president and parliament. You have also, it's always hard to bring down a government if it's more oligarchical as opposed to monolithic. And so what I see is that a lot of people are going to be killed. A lot of damage is going to be done. And while the Iranians will be the primary victims of this, over 900 civilians died as a result of the Israeli bombing in their 12-day war, that there's going to be a lot of destruction elsewhere in the region, including attacks on Israel. Israel intercepted most of the missiles, but a fair number of them got through. Again, a lot of damage, a lot more than they were willing to report at the time. So again, it's going to be a bloody mess any way you look at it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Israel, because I wanted to ask you, because the last time we saw the 12-day war, Israel did take a good amount of hits. And now we're seeing these videos of these underground tunnels full of just missiles in Iran.
Okay.
So do you think the Trump administration is underestimating Iran's capacity to absorb a strike and then to deliver back?
Almost certainly. I mean, there's so time and time again we've seen a great overconfidence, by the United States in terms of its ability to neutralize its opponents. Now, I should mention that that technologically things are a lot more sophisticated. That the targeting is with drones and this kind of technology is much more precise. The anti-missile capabilities for American ships and bases and things like that are more advanced as well. So I don't think we should assume it's going, that the more catastrophic scenarios by war opponents are necessarily going to happen either. But it's certainly not going to be without far more serious damage, I think, than the Trump administration is predicting.
Right, but I want you to tell us more about Iran, because if you look at media reports, especially Western media, it looks like Iran is in ultimate chaos. People are unhappy with the government. There are mass protests in not just Tehran, but in other smaller cities as well. And unofficial numbers say that thousands of people have been killed by IRGC members, by the police. So what really is happening in Iran? What are these protests about?
Well, primarily the protests are against a brutal, autocratic, corrupt, reactionary regime that, as we've seen in pro-democracy movements, throughout much of the world over the past 30, 40 years, from the Arab Spring to Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia. And Latin America, elsewhere, that people want freedom and they want a functioning economy. And though the U.S.-led sanctions have certainly hurt Iran quite a bit, the crony capitalism and corruption and the like by the regime, is very much of their own making in terms of the economic problems, and the excuse of the sanctions is wearing thin. What's significant about the most recent wave of protest is that it started with the Bazaris that were traditionally the backbone of support for the regime, that it had a much broader support in terms of class and geographically than we've seen other waves of protest. I mean, previous protests have been somewhat disproportionate among middle class students and the like, but it's clear that the dissatisfaction is deep. And you know, they're of course the Iranians are going to blame the CIA or the Mossad, for this kind of thing. I mean, regimes will always blame outside agitators or whatever, and then certainly I wouldn't put it past the CIA or Mossad to try to stir up things or promote things, that kind of thing, and maybe and perhaps some of the more violent incidents were pushed by some external elements, but my sense is that was overwhelmingly genuine and spontaneous. And this idea, I mean, if you look at Iranian history, they have this amazing history of civil resistance going back to the 1890s with the tobacco strikes against the concessions to the Russian Empire, the Constitutional Revolution in 1906, of course, the revolution overthrew the Shah in 1979. To say that these people wouldn't be rebelling if it weren't for a Western interference. I mean, the West can't teach the Iranians about civil resistance any more than they can teach them how to cook fastoon or any. This is very very much an organic movement.
Right.
And now another thing that was different was it was more violent than the most. And I think there's a tendency in the media, I mean, not just in Iran but around the world, including here in the United States, that if there are riots, they get 90% of the attention, even if there are only 10% of the actual participants. I mean, the movement was overwhelmingly nonviolent.
Right.
And one could even take the cynical attitude that does the United States Israel really want a democratic Iran? Because a truly democratic Iran would still be anti-Western imperialism and anti-Zionist, only it would have a little more credibility because it would clearly represent the popular will. So again, this idea that this is some kind of Western or Israeli plot is really totally misplaced.
Right. Okay. So, do you think the Khamenei regime is at its weakest it's ever been?
In certain ways, yes, but I don't think we're really at the point where we can see its overthrow. I mean, I think what we're seeing is comparable to what we saw in Eastern Europe, in the 70s and 80s. That they are not at a point where they can bring down the early 80s. They're not at a point where they can bring down these regimes, but the ideological hegemony is gone. I mean, if you think of Poland and Czechoslovakia and other places in the 1970s, say, even people even socialists, leftists said, hey, this is not socialism. This is a self-perpetuating, repressive, bureaucratic elite who are using socialism to justify, their continued rule. And similarly in Iran, even people who believe in an Islamic state in theory are saying things like the Islamic Republic is neither. They are using Islam as an excuse for this bureaucratic, oppressive, elite to stay in power. So again, people aren't buying it anymore. Right. The official rallies where they bust people in, I mean, the level of enthusiasm is considerably less than the pro-regime rallies of 10, 20, 30 years ago. That in many ways they are weak. But one thing that makes bringing down the regime more difficult is that I've studied the 40, 50 civil insurrections over the past 40 years, that have 40, 50 years that have brought down authoritarian regimes. And this is the first one where there's a serious challenge to a regime that itself came to power through massive civil resistance. Indeed, the revolution that brought down the Shah was largely street protest, popular contestation of public space, rioting, strikes, boycotts, again, classic civil resistance, kinds of measures. And so the regime is taking some proactive steps. For example, two of the things that finally brought down the Shah was a strike by the oil workers, obviously important because that was the regime's main source of revenue, and the customs workers. You have to have people who could let things come in and out of the country. Otherwise, the economy collapses. Well, the oil workers union is infiltrated top to bottom with so-called Islamic committees that are loyal to the state and the customs workers are now wholly controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. And they've taken similar measures. Indeed, the Revolutionary Guard is in many ways at least as powerful as the clerics, because not only are they a military force, they control whole sectors of industry, of educational institutions, of things across the country. So even though the regime is at an all-time low in terms of popularity, as low as a number of regimes that have been toppled by their own people, it's going to be a lot more difficult than, say, overthrowing Milosevic or Mubarak or Marcos or some of the other governments that popular movements have brought down.
Yeah, my concern is that in case the Iranian regime right now is toppled, somebody more younger, more radical is going to come into power, and they will ensure that Iran gets the nuclear bomb, because they will be able to convince people that you need this for Iran's survival. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if I was an Iranian and I looked at how they were listed among the so-called axis of evil, along with Saddam's Iraq and North Korea, and I've seen how the countries to my immediate east and immediate west have been invaded by the United States and had their governments toppled, and I knew that regime change is the explicit policy of the United States, I would look at Iraq and say, well, they got rid of their nuclear program, allowed the inspectors back in, and they got invaded anyway, and their government overthrown, their country occupied. North Korea, by contrast, throughout the inspectors, started building nuclear weapons. They're still in power. What lesson is there to that? Maybe we really do need a nuclear deterrent. And I think, frankly, that's what the big concern is with the United States, because, and Israel, that I don't think anybody really believes that Iran's going to make a first strike against Israel. That'd be suicidal. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. They don't have missiles anywhere close to reaching the United States. They're not suicidal. Indeed, both Israeli and American intelligence agencies have ultimately said that Iran ultimately is rational. Besides, it's again being ruled more by committee than a single leader. That also makes people a little more conservative in terms of what kind of provocative military actions they might make. And indeed, the United States through the Cold War. I mean, the Soviet Union had like 15,000 nuclear weapons pointed at us, and we said we don't have to worry because we have a deterrent. Mutually assured destruction or whatever. So why is we're so freaked out about the idea that we're getting maybe 2 or 3 Hiroshima-sized bombs? And I think it's because they would have a deterrent in a sense that it might make Israel, the United States, think twice before the next major attack in the Middle East. So I think really that's what the concern is about ultimately. But again, we don't have any evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. They have a civilian nuclear program that could fork off in the direction of making a bomb, and their estimates vary from 6 months to 2 years. But it is but even if that was their intent, it's we can see a certain rational logic for them wanting to go in that direction.
Okay. Mr. Zunes, if the United States does carry out strikes on Iran, one, do you think Israel is going to jump in and carry out strikes along with the United States? And number two, how are the other actors going to react? And when I say the other actors, I mean not just Houthis and Hezbollah, I also mean Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Turkey.
I don't think Israel will join in initially.
Okay.
I mean, we'll certainly share intelligence and targeting and information that the U.S. doesn't have them already. But I don't see them part of the initial wave of attacks. But I think Iran may end up attacking Israel anyway, and of course, then that would indeed drag Israel into the conflict as well. The Arab states are actually pretty skeptical about this. I mean, a lot of people forget that not only, despite its size, not only is Israel far more powerful than Iran, but the military budgets of Saudi Arabia, even of UAE, are substantially higher than Iran. So though there's always been this rivalry between the Arab Gulf states and Iran, none of them are, seriously see Iran as a major threat, and are cautioning the United States against taking military action because they know that, again, Iran could attack their countries where there are Americans based, or again disrupt shipping in the Gulf and the like, and so that there is and Turkey similarly is very concerned about the impact on regional stability. So as with the Iraq War, the Arab states and Turkey and other neighbors are saying, "Whoa, wait a minute! This could have all sorts of unforeseen consequences that could be, quite serious." They also point out that, hey, if if you're really concerned about the nuclear question, why not do what the people in Latin America and Africa and Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Pacific have done, and that is create a nuclear weapons-free zone. But the U.S. has rejected that because it would force Israel to give up its nuclear weapons and would prevent the United States from bringing nuclear weapons on our ships and planes into the region. So really, again, this is not about non-proliferation. This is not about democracy. Again, this is about asserting U.S. hegemony.
Okay. Well, very quickly before we wrap this up, what role do you see China and Russia playing? We already know that Russia has sent one warship to do drills with Iran. We've also seen reports of China sending military equipment to Iran. Do you think they will play this role of spectators, or do you think this time they will actually be directly intervening?
I don't see either country directly intervening, but I think it will. If the United States does go ahead with the war, I think it will just underscore their concern that the United States is a rogue superpower. That any kind of détente or lessening of tensions would be naive. That the U.S. is willing to violate the UN Charter and by launching an aggressive war, despite the large scale of international and, for that matter, domestic opposition. The vast majority of Americans oppose a war. And so I don't see a direct confrontation regarding Iran. It's going to definitely have a negative impact in the relationships between Russia and China with the United States. And that could have more serious implications in any number of issues around the world. If we could unilaterally attack Iran like that, not only could Putin say, why are you so upset about what I'm doing to Ukraine? The Chinese could say, well, we'll go ahead and go after Taiwan or whatever. This is again, the thing about international law is that just like domestic law, you don't want to have a precedent that can be used by others for a greater law breaking down the road.
Brilliant. Professor Zunes, thank you again for speaking to Fair Observer, and to all our viewers who enjoyed this, do check out Mr. Zunes on his Substack, and do subscribe to Fair Observer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.